Welcome, gentlemen. And I will sit here, and I will have, I will moderate, and I will also keep an eye on the time here. Now, you are in the same sector, so there are some similarities. But if you would like to describe the difference from you, and also where you think that you complement each other, A, for an investor, and B, for, let's say, a consumer. And I will start with you, Rolf, because you're sitting closest to me.
Thank you. No, but I think the differentiator, I should say, for us is the composition of the syngas. That makes us more relevant when it comes to upgrading with catalytic processes and such things. Then it's a question of the size of a plant, and that can also be a differentiator between us. But I think that's the most relevant.
And Henrik, you agree, or would you like to complement?
Well, I think especially on the size thing.
So it's a size thing.
It's I mean, technology-wise, we represent 3 different technologies, where ours is sort of quote unquote the larger one for larger applications per unit. Then we all can work with blocks and several units, and then we will get sort of a plant overlap. And then we also differ in types of applications, whereas we're more geared toward power generation at very high efficiencies, and also the larger scale.
Niclas?
Yeah, maybe Cortus and Meva Energy have a few more similarities comparison with Phoenix BioPower as of now, in particular since we are both targeting gas production and Phoenix is doing CHP eventually. There are differences. There are also many similarities. I think one thing that I would like to highlight is that there is actually the similarities, because from a good point of view. Because we don't just talk about individual companies emerging and making a mark for the future. It's also about the emergence of a small industry here, or segment, and it is a good thing for us to have other peers forming, to some extent, a cluster context in Sweden. Developing these technologies is not really a surprise, maybe, because we are a country based on managing forests in new innovative ways. So I don't consider the differences so much in my daily work. I look more at the similarities, actually.
And if we look at capital requirement, I've written down a headline here: patience is a virtue, and it seems like it's extremely true when it comes to your sector here, or the renewable sector, because we know something is going to happen, and we know the market is huge, but it's also new technology, which has to be tested, of course. So how do you deal with, regardless of being quoted, officially quoted or not, how do you deal with the development demands from clients and the system to work, and the investors' demands on let's say, annual dividend or a good deal in the market? Let's start with you then, Niclas.
Yeah. Well, these companies are growth companies. To be very honest, Kaarlo, the issue of annual dividends is not really on the table for us. We want to grow. The growth rate is important. It is also important to make sure that the impact potential is growing. I think that the market, the investor market, and also our real customer market has matured a lot the last few years. We have what could be referred to as maybe the Greta effect, But in a more general context, a lot of industries being much more aware about these issues now. They have set their 2030 targets, and now they need to act upon them and make investments. So the future looks really good for this industry, and that's really the key message here. I think we have been maybe a bit premature in our understanding of when there would be market appetite. I would say that almost all the market appetite is still ahead of us, it's a good position to be in now. When we have developed these technologies, when the TRL levels have increased, you come to the market and then you're there, and you have saved yourself a whole many years in comparison with the ones that are starting as of now. It will be a big hurdle for anybody to get to the point where these three companies are now.
It's a here from you both?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's utility scale technology takes at least 10 years to develop. That's just how it is. And there is unfortunately, what we've seen from the investor side is a lack of understanding that utility scale technology, and especially within the energy system, you have these lead times. I mean, we're not developing an app here where the MVP costs €1 million and takes 12 months. My MVP costs 100 million euros almost. I mean, it's in vast magnitude. And then it's also a matter of expectations management. Don't promise that, I'll have a plant in 2 years, because I'll be lying. It's always, and then add to that, there's always delays for various reasons.
And you mentioned technology with apps and so on. So I'll turn to you then, Rolf. Yeah. When you have this technology up and running, then what do you say about the barriers of entry? In my humble opinion, the amount of money and technology and time that an investor will spend in your technology will then be fairly rewarding, because if you don't start now, you will not be able to deliver in 10 years' time or 3 years' time or whatever. How do you view that?
No, but I think that's very true. It's the lead time of getting something like this into an industrial operational plant is long, and there are several steps along the way, and very much of the work is you can say very time consuming, because it's going up and down in temperature, it's cooling down, it's doing whatever analysis, and the lead time is it's sometimes one thinks nothing happens, but it's an extreme activity behind. So it's really, it really takes a lot of efforts, and you can say that if you start now, you will of course have an advantage, saying that we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, but it is challenging. So I think we are, the three of us are in a very good position in that respect.
So soon to harvest then, and the barriers of entry will not be, I mean, they will be significant, I take it.
If I may, I heard a comment from one of the managers of Almi Green Tech. They said that, well, the difference between utility scale deep tech and traditional tech development is that the MVP is cheap, and then you just pour a lot of development money and marketing on it, and then at the end you have a product. For us, is you need to pour a huge amount of money to get to your MVP, and then when you reach commercial level, like you guys are at now, you sort of, the revenue stream, the commercial risk is extremely low comparatively, because the barrier of entry is not really so much IP, but money. Money and time, which is always tends to be the same thing. And also adding to what you said about the decarbonization. I mean, I know we used to say during the pandemic that the lead head of digitization was the COVID. Well, the lead CO2 conversion driver now is Vladimir Putin.
Yes, you're right. And if we then look at the underlying, well, let's say, fuel here, access to biomass, what can we say about Sweden and the rest of the world? And now we start with you.
Well, I asked Svebio, the organization for bioenergy in Sweden, and the former CEO, he told me that Sweden is using between 140 and 160 terawatt hours of biomass for energy purposes in Sweden. That's basically the amount of electricity. So this is the primary energy source in Sweden today. So there's a lot out there. It's just a matter of, okay, what do we use it for? Can we use it more efficiently? Then it's wrong. And if we're looking on a European scale, a study from Imperial College said that there is about 4,000 terawatt hours of dry biomass in terms of residues available for energy purposes. So there's a lot out there. It's just a matter of the Nordic countries are very good at the infrastructure of sourcing the waste streams, taking it out of the forest and taking it from the sawmills. The rest of Europe and the world needs to sort of play catch up on sort of taking care of the non-primary parts of the biomass.
And Niclas, you mentioned how you were helping IKEA and they helping you. So I would take it, you know, it's there is always a way to find, let's say, the fuel, if I express myself a little bit casual here. Going forward here, because you mentioned Poland as well with the IKEA here, how do you see the difference there? Is there any difference regulation-wise, or?
Yes, there are differences in regulation. You have to work those areas as well. Get to the point where you understand the regulation and when you can deal with it. Most of the European countries are similar in terms of the big general frameworks. So we have the Renewable Energy Directive, we have the Industrial Emissions Directive, but that's the type of knowledge you need to build. If not directly in-house, you need to have it easily accessible. Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, it's also a hurdle for newcomers once you have positioned yourself as somebody who knows the frameworks, who can say to your customer, we know the framework, we know exactly what level of nitrox and NOx emissions that you're allowed to have and not, and we can promise to stay below that threshold. There's also this very neat mechanism within the EU framework that is referred to as best practice. Okay. So some of the frameworks they specify that if a technology obtains a best practice status, that technology is kind of commissioned to be the one to use. Not particularly from a certain company or from a certain brand, but in generally defined, it should be, like in this case, gasification maybe for some of the challenges that the world is facing when it comes to waste disposal and waste energy use. So and that's of course a very, very interesting position. If you would be able to qualify one of these technologies as the best practice technology within a certain niche segment within the EU, you could almost have a monopolistic situation. So
you got another barriers of entry there, you could say.
Yeah, sure.
And Rolf, if we come back to the access to the underlying fuel here and your cooperation here with Höganäs, anything to add or comment here on the access?
No, but I would say that we've seen an upturn in the prices and the availability of feedstock in southern Sweden has been changing a lot. But I think we will see a change in that for the coming year. There are changes in Sweden where a lot of combined heat and power are powered up, I would say, for the electricity during the firing season. There's not as much biomass coming from Russia and Belarus.
Of course.
So the whole situation has changed, but generally it takes a year or two before there is a new balance. But coming back to the numbers, it's really, I think when it comes to the forest residues, it's like, I think Svebio says it's about 20 to 40 terawatt hours that are not utilized in Sweden today. So it isn't really an issue from that perspective, but it is also, as Niclas says, how do we use it in the best of ways?
But it definitely isn't an issue for you. But yet again, I'm coming back to the barriers of entry here, because I mean, you obviously have thought that through and you have your channels. So just because it's not an issue for you doesn't mean it's an issue. It's not an issue for a latecomer. Given the fact that we're addressing even an international audience here, and we look at the state's role and regulatory framework, you mentioned EU and best practice and so on. In Sweden, are we in the front line? Start with you, Rolf.
Yes,
on the regulatory state.
On the regulatory,
way, no?
yeah. We have been in processes in California, in Italy, and comparing those with the Swedish, I would say the Swedish are very solid. But it's also a little bit different how these things are done from country to country. But in general, we are in a good position here.
So with that, I'll be the devil's advocate, and then I turn to you, Henrik, and I say, could the authorities be more active here and promote the new technology, and both in terms of funding and regulations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I was in Paris last week, and France, they are extremely active in the promotion of new technologies and getting companies to move in there. They have tax credit, government-sponsored programs to a extremely larger amount on a relative and an actual basis compared to Sweden. So there's a lot that can be done, and also you can do. I mean, we have the laws of public procurement. They can be used for innovative procurements in a much better way than they are doing now, and also you can look at, okay, where is money being spent? Okay, now the large chunk of money coming out of the Energy Agency goes to commercial technologies like Industriklivet, whereas you should be a significantly larger amount towards emerging technologies, because in the deep tech utility scale arena, it's really expensive already at TRL 2 and 3. And when you have timelines of 10 years, private capital just tends not to be there. So should come in to correct for market errors.
And then Niclas, any adds on?
You always want the world to push in favor of the transition, right? And we haven't done enough on a global scale. Far from it. Fossil hydrocarbons are still very, very cheap in comparison with the renewable alternatives. So much more needs to be done. But I would say, coming back to your question specifically, I'd say that the Swedish context is good. There are, of course, political changes happening, and sometimes one technology is focused before the other. But on a general scale, I think Sweden's got a very sound and good and climate-friendly policy making. Yeah.
And if we then just look at the EU, I mean, so Sweden is obviously in the forefront here, and the EU would be in the forefront of the world. Would that be a crazy statement, or would it be a...
I think they are. I mean, now with the RED3, I mean, from our point of view, the biomass residues are considered renewables, which some of the Dutch and the Polish didn't think it should be. But now the RED3, as you described, biomass waste is basically how we use biomass waste in Sweden today. I mean, you do your higher value products just as Niclas started out with, and then the rest we do energy for. And then we use that as efficiently as possible. That's basically what the cascade principle says. And then I think EU is getting to the forefront in terms of the carbon credits, the negative emissions market that's up and coming. And with the emissions rights being reduced, driving up the price of emission. And that's, I think, because that's going to be way higher levels than that we see in the US, where it's capped at $75 a ton.
So in conclusion here, if I were to say that gasification of biomass would be the future, if we should have some sort of energy transition, and I'm trying to find the keywords of conclusion here, then obviously, even if you were to pour money on a new untested technology, I mean, it's still, you have to prove that it works, and obviously your product works there, so, and you have your pilots and pilot projects. So the barrier of entries will be regardless of how much money you will put in there. And you have secured, let's say, the underlying fuel, and you just need to have more clients finding you. Is that a way to see it here? Because it seems like a no-brainer if you're an Höganäs or if you're indeed an IKEA. That, I mean, you actually add value to the bottom line. Would you agree or disagree?
I would say more or less yes. Yeah. But again, things. I was thinking a little bit about what you said here. Policy making is sometimes a bit too slow, and they are not addressing new technologies really in the pace it should. So sometimes it is easy for new technology developers like us to be in a situation where the regulatory frameworks are not specifying exactly what you're doing, and they have to fit your technology into an existing wording, which might be the right one. And I'm thinking precisely about the certification of the biochar that I mentioned earlier during my speech. So the EU has certified biochar as a proper means to create a carbon sink. Sweden has not done that yet.
Oh, okay.
And that's probably just a matter of time, because there are no substantial reasons why Sweden shouldn't. But that kind of regulatory development takes time, and that's still a hurdle, I would say. You need to also to push those activities forward in a quicker way.
Excellent. I thank you for that, and I thank you for your patience here.